November 9th, 2022 meeting of the East Lansing Planning Commission. Mr. Menzer, would you please call roll?
I would be happy to. Chair Bowman.
Here.
Vice Chair Sullivan.
Here.
Commissioner Williams.
Here.
Commissioner Wolf.
Here.
Commissioner Lapine is absent tonight. Commissioner Wagner is also absent tonight. Commissioner Hendricks is currently absent. Commissioner Boyd.
Here.
Commissioner Denault. Quorum is present.
We have a quorum. Thank you. We have in front of you an agenda for this evening's meeting. I will entertain a motion to approve that agenda.
So moved.
Second. It's been moved by Vice Chair Sullivan and seconded by Commissioner Wolf. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed? That motion carries. Also in your packet was a copy of a draft of the minutes of the October 26, 2022 meeting of the Planning Commission. I will entertain a motion to approve those minutes. So moved.
Support.
It's been moved by Commissioner Wolf and seconded by Commissioner Williams. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed? That motion carries. We have no committees to provide reports. That brings us on to item 3, staff reports. Mr. Menzer.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Happy to see you all tonight. Just a couple quick updates and one follow-up piece of information from the last meeting. So we'll start with city council updates. So the council met, since the last time the planning commission met, the council met on November 1, and they did just a couple of housekeeping items. So they set the public hearing for the pavilion project for their consideration for the December 6th meeting. That timeline is fluid as the project, and I'll explain that more when it gets to this item, kind of as the project team works with the consultants on developing the next iteration of the plan for that project. But we'll talk about that in detail soon. But we are planning on being at council on the 6th for a public hearing for the site plan for that project. They set the public hearing for 2040 Merritt Road. That's another item on tonight's agenda. That would be also at the December 6th public meeting or public hearing. So that would be for the special use permit. They referred the Valley Court Section 61 review to the Planning Commission, and that is now on the agenda for this evening. That's part of the process required under state laws. Council has to refer it to the Planning Commission. So they took that step. And then they also introduced the rezoning that's on tonight's agenda, the 1788 Woodside, and referred it to the Planning Commission. So also public hearing tonight. And looking forward, next week, the council meets and they have a discussion only meeting on the 15th. On that agenda right now is a brief conversation on accessory dwelling units. My plan is to go to council and get some feedback on the general direction on what the ordinance, so you've all seen the draft ordinance, or at least an early version of the draft ordinance. What I'm hoping to talk to council about is kind of just some general support for the provisions that are included within. So some of those are pretty big policy decisions, and I'm looking to see if they're aligned with council's vision for how this ordinance might manifest. So we'll get some feedback on that and hopefully plot a course of action. And if they're in support of that, I would expect them to come back in December, to their meeting in December, to possibly introduce a draft and refer it to the Planning Commission for a public hearing. Also on the 11:15 agenda is a review of the responses to the request for proposals for the property at Coleman West that the city owns. So the city owns I think 26-acre lot there at the southwest corner of Coleman and West Roads. There's been discussion in the public realm about what the future of that site might be. And then that really kind of coincides with the Planning Commission's discussion of how might the northern tier look in 20 years. So that is on to, there were 3 responses to the RFPs. Those will be unveiled in this week's council meeting packet, and along with a brief analysis from our planning team. And they'll talk about the proposals and hopefully identify a direction on that, or at least begin to discuss a direction on it. Looking ahead for Planning Commission, so on December 14th, a reminder, there's only one meeting in December for the commission, and then after the meeting on the 14th, this group does not meet again until January 11. So enjoy the time away. The hoping to have the pavilion site plan back. Again, I'm going to provide some more information on that in a bit here. So that's for Valley Court Park, and potential action on the rezoning that's on tonight's agenda. And then depending on where council goes with like the northern tier discussion, maybe back to some of the future land use map stuff, we could add that to the agenda as well. So that's up for updates. I was hoping to very briefly respond to a question from Commissioner Williams about Building C from last meeting, and I'll keep it really brief. So park, I'm going to be as brief as possible. So the Park District was a project that happened several years ago in the city. The first two phases of it are the Graduate Hotel and the Abbott Apartments. There was a phase 3 that was going to be this building, this called Building C. And that was a 5-story residential building, 99 units. There was going to be an LMI aspect to it. And it was supposed to be that low moderate income housing that fulfilled the requirements for the other phases. So that was, they were put off in the other phases, and they were going to be in this third phase. So that's kind of the context to this. Obviously, the site is not developed right now. And it's not an uncomplicated situation. The city right now is working with developers and Michigan Economic Development Corporation to kind of formulate a plan that might be used to bring a project to fruition on that site. So as of now, the development agreement for that property required a project to be completed by like early 2025. So that had a pretty big time frame. What is public knowledge is that the developer has indicated that they aren't planning on building a project there. So that's part of it, but also the if a project doesn't happen on the site in the current arrangement, the city would get the property after that time frame, but it would be deed restricted to be parkland. So no development there. And I'm not making a judgment on that one way or the other, but there was really to ensure that the city's position in this is working to ensure that this element from the required LMI units comes to fruition in some form, whether it's to build Building C as was approved initially, or whether it's to bring someone else on that would build Building C. But really there was this requirement that has to be met, but also there was like an expectation and a commitment that this was going to be a part of this project. So the city's working on that right now. So it's not real clear kind of where that leads in the immediate short term. And it's definitely complex. There's a lot of factors in play. But we're working with the current property owner, the MEDC, and some other folks along the way to try to see how this might all come together. The other complicating factor is that the zoning expires on that. So it was a conditional rezoning. The zoning expires in 2023. So not that couldn't be changed, but there's a couple deadlines in there as to how that all works out. It was a conditional rezoning on the project happening. So if that doesn't happen, then. So there's a lot of things to consider. It's a lot of moving pieces. I'm hoping to have more information for you at some point in the future, but nothing solid right now.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Menzer? Commissioner Wolf?
Yeah, it was reported at the time that the developer offered it to the city to buy back then they would lift the restriction on it being parkland. Is that still on the table? The city council didn't receive it very warmly, as I recall.
I don't know the status of that. I know it hasn't happened. I don't know the likelihood of it happening in the future.
Other questions for Mr. Menzer?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any commissioner announcements? All right, then. On to item number 5, communications from citizens. We have multiple written communication regarding the Valley Court Park proposal that we saw last or 2 weeks ago, and correspondence regarding City Ordinance 1281.
Yeah, that
I saw that.
That was an item that was added later in my update from this afternoon from the applicant for the rezoning this afternoon. I think they can explain why they wanted to share that with you.
Sure, I did see that. Thank you. So thank you for that. And then this is the time in our meeting when we invite members of the public to come forward and address the Planning Commission on matters that are either on our agenda or just would like to bring to our attention. We do have one public hearing this evening, the rezoning of 1788 Woodside Drive, but won't take public comment on the other items at that time in the meeting. So if you've got something that you'd like to bring to our attention, now would be the time. All right. Seeing no one come forward, Ms. Ordialis, do we have anybody in the queue?
We do not have anyone in the queue.
All right, thank you. Then we'll move on to public hearings. Our first and only public hearing of the evening, Ordinance 1517, a request to rezone 1788 Woodside Drive from B2 to RM32.
Okay.
Mr. Menzer?
Yeah, thank you. Be a lot of me talking tonight. So stop me along the way if I keep going too much. So as noted, there is a late update to this. We added the communication, and then I made some changes to the staff memo to reflect just a little bit of a change condition in the request. And so I'm going to go over all that right now, and and the applicants are here in the room tonight to answer any questions and to elaborate on their application. So this is a conditional rezoning request to rezone this property. It's one parcel, less than half acre in size, 1788 Woodside Drive. It's in an area that's south of Hazlitt Road, east of Hagedorn. It's behind a couple of apartment buildings and adjacent to a neighborhood. They're proposing to rezone from B2 to RM32. It's a single family home on the lot. It's about 1,000 square feet. So the applicant has, for the rezoning, has voluntarily offered to condition this rezoning on the property reverting back to B2 zoning. So the rezoning would go from B2 to RM32, which is one of the city's multiple family districts. But with this condition, it would revert back to B2 should the property owner voluntarily relinquish a rental license for the property. So I'm sure they can share more information, and I'm going to go into that in a little bit here. But as I mentioned, this is a single family house built in 1941. It's on a lot that doesn't have frontage, but it's adjacent to Woodside Drive. It's one parcel back from Woodside Drive. And I'm referencing the map that's in the staff memo here, if you see me pointing. So the property shares a driveway with the property immediately to the west. And the property immediately to the west is also owned by the applicant for the rezoning tonight. So there is an easement that establishes that drive back to the property without frontage that's being proposed for rezoning. The property at 1780, which is to the west, does have a rental license, a class 4 rental license that allows up to 4 unrelated persons or a family to occupy that dwelling. And there is a condition on the rental license that prohibits parking in that shared driveway so that there's access that's maintained between 1780 and 1788 further to the east. As I mentioned, this is a conditional rezoning, and it's basically the same in terms of process as a rezoning, with the exception of there's conditions proposed. And conditions are voluntarily proposed by an applicant. The city cannot, it's not a negotiation about the conditions, it's kind of an acceptance or rejection. There's also can't be kind of a dialogue about the condition, the nature of the condition. And so basically the city can't exert influence in trying to change a condition or suggesting that a condition should be different or a new condition should be added. It's like a take or leave it proposed from the applicant. So as I note in the staff memo, if you haven't had to take a look at it on page 2, and I have shared with this with the applicant, and this is actually the reason that it was added this a little later in the process than is typical. And I do want to note that the condition has to be offered before the Planning Commission's public hearing, and that was done. So I do, though, have significant concerns about the condition. Really, so I don't think that it meets the standards of the ordinance. So right now, the conditional zoning ordinance and the state law say that these conditions have to relate to the use and or development of the land for which the rezoning is requested, and also that they must have a reasonable and rational relationship to the property for which the rezoning is requested. So some of my thinking on this is the use of the property both before and after the rezoning will be a detached single-family home. There's no proposed change in the use. The house that's there is currently non-conforming under existing B2 zoning, so it's a single-family house in a B2 zoning district. The reversion, if at some point in the future, and again, that point is not named, the property would revert back to B2, which would make the house non-conforming. The house is not currently licensed as a rental. And the reason I mention that is the condition is related to or assumes that the property would be a licensed rental in the future. However, a variance is needed from the Zoning Board of Appeals to qualify for the rental license. So there's a provision in our ordinance that says that the property has to meet the standards of the district in order to qualify for a rental license. So it has to meet the ordinance. Right now, there's a non-conforming driveway that would have to be a non-conforming driveway and a garage. The applicant's committed or has shared with us that they intend on changing the garage to remove that the driveway to remove that nonconformity, but the garage would need a variance from the Zoning Board of Appeals. Also, the interior of the home needs to meet current building code to qualify for a license. And I'm not implying that it doesn't or that it's not possible. I don't know that right now. And also the time period noted in the condition, specifically being sometime in the future whenever this current property owner voluntarily relinquishes the rental license. To me, it's really not concrete, and it doesn't consider changes in ownership of the property or changes in surrounding land uses. So I initially just rejected this condition, and after talking with the applicant, in the spirit of due process, wanted to have it as part of this application as it proceeds through the public process. The Planning Commission has the option to make a decision on whether you think this condition is appropriate, whether you think it meets the standards of the ordinance. You can move ahead in your recommendation. When you get to the meeting in December, you could choose to move ahead with the condition or recommend that the condition is not appropriate. So let's get into more details on the property. We talked about the zoning. It's currently zone B2. That makes it a non-conforming use. Like I said, it doesn't have any frontage on the road, but it does have this shared driveway easement with the property to the west that's also owned by the applicant. In the staff memo, I go through the review criteria that's used for rezoning. So I think probably the thing to identify right now is that right now the property in the future land use map is identified as R1. And there are some properties in the area that are also proposed for R1. The memo includes a review of the uses that are allowed in a current zoning in B2 and on the proposed RM32. The only things I would note here, I think, are that there are some uses by SUP that are like nonprofit art galleries, libraries, museums, nonprofit organization headquarters, professional clinics, professional offices, public utilities, Class B dwellings that would be allowed under RM32. However, that would be subject to a special use permit. But the uses by right are single family dwellings, duplexes, and multiple family dwellings. There's no current development proposed at this time. As you'll see in the application materials, the applicant notes that these properties could be used for something in the future, and they can elaborate on that. But there's nothing proposed any different right now than the single family detached home. Talked about the rezoning, and I think that's all I need to share right now. Certainly, I'm available to answer any questions. The owners of the property are here to give us some background, and thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Menzer? Commissioner Wolf?
I wasn't quite clear what you were saying about our decision on this. Were you saying that we only have two choices? We either can recommend its approval as written, as a conditional zoning, or if we think it's not an appropriate conditional zoning, we have to recommend against it completely?
No, the way I was seeing this was that you have I think three options. You could recommend approval with the condition attached. You could recommend approval without the condition attached, or you could recommend denial.
Thanks.
Other questions? I have one. Something that was in the applicant's letter that confused me, and then it seemed that you confirmed it. So the suggestion was made that if the license is relinquished, then the property would revert back to B2 zoning?
That's what they are proposing.
No, okay, but so that's that's not, all right, so the statement that's offered here in the letter is, that is, if the conditional, if the condition is accepted, that would happen.
Correct.
It won't happen if the condition is not.
If the condition isn't accepted and ultimately council chooses not to accept the condition, they could make the rezoning. I call it like just a straight rezoning, just one district to another, and that condition would not be included.
Okay. Right. So that is actually that's a condition of the stipulation that's placed on the this particular application. It's not going to switch back just because the license has been relinquished, unless this condition is accepted.
Correct. Yes. Yes.
That is the condition,
Correct.
correct?
Yeah, correct.
That's why it's conditional rezoning,
Right.
because of the provision that it would
Exactly.
revert.
All right. Any other questions for Mr. Menzer? All right, I see the applicants are here. If you have something you want to add to, please come forward. Mr. Hagan, how are you?
Good. How are everybody tonight? Thank you, Matt Hagan, Hagan Realty, 927 East Grand River in East Lansing. Brother Kevin is here tonight as well. For those of you who don't know us, we're a family-owned and operated business. My dad started the company over 50 years ago. We primarily do property close to MSU, so this is a little bit of a different product than what we are used to dealing with. We have a similar situation out in Okemos where we have some townhomes that we built, and so we envisioned possibly something of that nature when we bought the first lot at 1780 about 5 years ago. We've had that as a rental since then, and it's just kind of a bridge, I guess, if you will, to what hopefully eventually will be some type of development. And that's really the reason that we're asking for the conditional rezoning now. We were able to recently acquire the back parcel, the 1788 parcel. And while it does currently have the B2 zoning, obviously that does not allow for the rental license. So again, with the idea of bridging the gap to a future redevelopment of the site, obviously we would like to convert it to a rental for the time being until construction costs come back. We get a game plan as to what we want to do there. So obviously there's been some discussion with ourselves and staff as to whether the condition is allowable or whatnot. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions or viewpoints on that. I've researched the code. I've had our attorney research the code. I think that we're within our right, and we just respectfully have differences of opinions there, I guess. The main reason that we are asking for the conditional rezoning is because we're not quite sure yet what the future redevelopment may be. There is parcels on that face Hazlitt Road that, while we do not have any type of current relationship with the owner, there is a possibility that we may be able to acquire future land. And we're trying to essentially keep our options open, that if we're able to acquire that additional land and a development makes sense to where we would be able to do a development off of Hazlitt Road and use the property that's at 1788 as part of that redevelopment, that we would want to be able to access that section of land as B2, which is what it obviously currently is. Hazlitt Road, the properties on Hazlitt Road are currently B2 that it's adjacent to. So whether or not that happens, we can't say, obviously. Our bread and butter is multifamily housing. That's most likely in the future what will go here. So our thought is, well, if we decide ultimately that multifamily is what we're going to do here, we'll have to come back to you guys again in the future once the housing license goes away and say, this is our project. We need to rezone this to RM32 contingent upon this project that we're developing. But you don't know what's going to happen 5 years from now, 10 years from now. You don't know if we're going to be able to acquire additional land or not. So this gives us the most flexibility and seems to us to make the most sense. Timing wise, I think it's a realistic request as far as the time goes in relation to the rental license as being the trigger to revert back, because in reality, we own both parcels, and if we decide to do something in the future and relinquish that rental license, the next step is clearly going to be a development. So the fact that it's reverting back to a non-conforming use or a single-family structure is really irrelevant in my opinion, because like I say, the next step is just going to be tear the house down and move on with whatever development it's going to be. So I understand in most situations you wouldn't want something to revert back to a non-conforming use. I think this is a unique situation where that mindset doesn't quite apply. we have, okay, I guess, yes, speaking real quickly to the late addition to the memo there, to the packet. We had a similar situation actually with my brother's house, is partially why we're aware of Ordinance 1281, I believe is what it is, where the church asked for a conditional rezoning. That property happened to back up to his house, and they were before the commission asking for a conditional rezoning to change it from a community-based deal, R1 or something, to RM14. And there was a conditional rezoning put on it to allow the church to be able to do what they wanted to do with the parcel, but at the same time to protect my brother's property and the surrounding properties, so on and so forth. So that type of conditional rezoning, the way the use was set up, really is very similar in our opinion to what we're requesting here. So that's why we provided it. There's no set time period necessarily with their request as far as 5 years or 10 years or anything of that nature, similar to what we're requesting. Once they stop using it as a church for that feature, it would go back to the previous rezoning, kind of the similar concept that we have here. So there's a lot of different ideas here and moving parts, and hopefully I didn't miss anything. Certainly here to answer any questions that you may have. And
Any questions for Mr. Hagan? Commissioner Wolf?
I'm still not sure I follow. Why are you concerned that in the future, if you came back, if you did not get a conditional rezoning, and in the future you came back and requested that parcel to be rezoned B2, which is what you're suggesting you'd like it to revert to, it would be difficult to get that?
that's kind of our assumption. Yeah, that's our assumption, that it could be difficult at that time to get it to B2.
Even though it's adjoining a B2 parcel already, and even though the future land use shows that area at least becoming C1?
Well, that's not quite, I don't think, what the future land use map shows there.
It doesn't show it, I don't think, for that parcel, but it's right adjoining it.
Correct,
so-
correct. And I guess that's
yeah,
kind of
right.
where things come into play. It's like, well, how is that going to be interpreted at that time? I mean, right now we feel like we have an asset in a B2 zone, B2 zoning, and we're hesitant to get rid of that or give that up, I guess.
Okay.
And so we're trying to, like I say, maintain that flexibility without, keeping the bridge, having the rental license to be able to manage that for a time period until it makes sense to develop. But yeah, we don't know if we'll be able to get that back at the time.
Can I continue?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I have a questioning about the rental licensing.
Sure.
You say that 1780, you've had a class 4 license for that for 7 years, I think.
I think about 5 years.
Okay, 2015 is when you.
Oh,
bought
7
it,
years?
but
Holy cow.
whatever.
Time flies.
And in your letter, you said that during that time, you have had several families live there.
Yep.
For them to live there, you don't need a class 4 license, right?
Correct, yeah. It's just, it
So
was
you
zoned
haven't
R30.
really needed it for that property up till now, correct?
Yeah, I mean, because it was zoned RM32, we were able to get the class 4 license. But yes, we have,
But you didn't need it.
yeah, I mean,
So, right, it was eligible for it,
it's eligible
so
for
you
it,
might as
right?
well get it. Yeah,
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
The,
I mean, just for the record, I would anticipate most likely a family renting this, but I mean, you never know. So obviously we'll make it available and whoever rents it, rents it. But the class 4 again would allow us the flexibility.
comparing the two properties, the 1780, the city records show it as about 2,000 square feet. So it's fairly good size.
Yeah.
It's a quad level, I guess, or
Yeah,
split
bi-level.
or
Yeah,
something like that.
4-bedroom, 2-bath bi-level. Yep.
Right. And the one we're considering now is about half that size, only about 1,000 square feet.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering why not just rent it under the limitations that exist there to a family? I mean,
So-
it seems kind of small to be renting to 4 individuals unless, I mean, I guess it would not be necessarily in downtown East Lansing. And
So I actually cannot currently get a rental license of any type in the B2 zoning. It's a non-conforming, or not allowed under B2 as far as my understanding of the ordinances.
Okay, yeah,
So-
true. But what you could do is ask to be rezoned to R1, which is actually what the the future land use map suggests, and is what the other properties around it are.
That would then limit our future redevelopment options, I guess, if we got it as R1. That would not make sense as a business standpoint to go to R1, I guess. And then the chances of going from R1 to RM32 or B2 in the future, I think, would be slim. So, the front's already zoned RM32. It's surrounded by more dense zoning. So,
okay. I have one other topic, but if someone else wants to, I'll not dominate the whole thing here. You show floor plans for the house. Do those show the current layout and so forth? Are those accurate to what is in place right now?
yeah.
So they're not some proposed revision that you're thinking of doing to the house, but it is the way it is right now.
Yeah, so I've been in contact with Annette Irwin, who handles, the housing license end of things. That's still a little bit up in the air. Obviously, we're asking for a class 4 unrelated or family. Whether or not the rooms that are there will be allowed to be occupied that way, I guess, is still up in the air. So, yeah, I guess if we get an RM32 rezoning, we may end up with a house that has 1 or 2 legal bedrooms, and we only get 1 or 2 people allowed to live there, or a family. So that part of it is still undecided. She will address from our communication, basically, until the rezoning aspect of things is handled. She just waits until that's done and then makes her determination going forward. And of course, we'll go through the
So we
alterations.
can't find out from her. So I have strong reservations about the house, the way it's set up there. If you look at it carefully, I could be making a mistake here, but it was built in 1941 as a very small house, probably with a single bedroom. It had a very small footprint, 1 bedroom on the second floor. That's all there was to it.
No, there's 2 bedrooms up there. It's divided by a bath in the middle.
Then
and stuff,
later, they built an addition on that side, is really what it looks like. And they put a living room on the ground floor and a bedroom on the second floor. So it made it into a somewhat larger 2-bedroom house. But then I guess at some point prior to you owning it, they made some changes to start calling that living room a bedroom. Because you look at the city records, they show it as a 2-bedroom house, not a 3-bedroom. Yeah. So,
I think that's the next step. And I mean, the building department will have to make those decisions on what's going to be allowed to, occupied and what's not. I mean, that's not my decision.
I'm kind of questioning how it got the way it is now, because, that western part, you look at it from outside or inside, it's got windows for a living room. They have low sills. There's 5, I think, big windows. It has a fireplace in it, right? That's what the diagram shows. It has a door to the outside. But then you look in the corner and it's got this little closet in there. So there really is a closet in that corner.
Yeah, I mean,
which would be very atypical for a living room. So at some point, I guess they tried to convert it to a bedroom.
Like I say, all that stuff will be determined by the building department and the housing officials. We may get a 1-bedroom house there. We don't know.
On top of that, if you use that as a bedroom, the person in there wants to go to the bathroom, they have to walk through the front room, past the kitchen, through the dining room to get to the bathroom. So it seems pretty clear to me that that room was never designed as a bedroom. So I'm very skeptical about us approving this with the idea that is going to become a 3rd bedroom in the house. But you're saying that's the way it was being used when you bought it?
I guess to me, the layout of the house itself doesn't necessarily impact the rezoning that's being requested.
Yeah, I can understand why you would feel that way.
The building department will make the decision on what's allowed to be used as a bedroom and what's not in the house when it goes through that process. That's not my decision. And
yeah, I'm just not quite sure that it's to the benefit of the city or the neighbors or whatever to take a house that was designed to be a smaller, fewer bedrooms and change it. I mean, this is what happened in much of downtown East Lansing. Obviously, you're very familiar with that, when houses were changed around, and it was to the detriment, in some ways at least, of the neighborhoods.
I've also heard a lot of comments at City Council about having affordable rental houses in East Lansing, and specifically for families. And I think this would be an opportunity to have that added as one. Like I said, we've had a family in the front unit now for 5 years. I would anticipate that similar type of situation in this house as well. So yes, we do student rentals as our primary bread and butter, but my brother lives in that neighborhood. It's not something that we're targeting to try and expand student rentals into that neighborhood. So the idea that we're looking to get 4 people in there and have a big party is just not the case.
Right, but actually what I was suggesting is that it would make a good small family rental as is, with a 2-bedroom setup.
Yeah, I think it would be a very good family rental. I mean, that's I guess why we're getting it licensed and what we anticipate it being. Whether it's a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom, the family's going to use it however they want to use it, what the city allows which space to be used. So, I mean, I guess that's that next step.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions for the applicant? I've got a, this doesn't have much to do with the zoning either, so if you don't want to answer it, that's fine.
No, it's all
But
good.
do you know how it ended up getting isolated there? Was that house, I mean, it was built in 1940. Was it built as I'm just curious.
We did not get that information. We acquired it. It is interesting though, when we talked about the comp plan and frontage and stuff, this was the specific lot that we talked about.
I remember talking to Brian about that, actually.
Yeah. So it is a very unique situation. It actually, it has a sewage ejector pump. So there's been some, issue with the sewer where it's not deep enough being back there and whatnot. So, it is what it is.
Okay.
It's got the easement, obviously.
Right.
Of course, us owning both parcels now is a little bit less of an issue there.
I was just trying to figure out if you could see an access from Hazlitt Road, like, really old, or maybe from, what was the street to the south? It doesn't matter.
It is unusual with the zoning off of Hazlitt Road, though. If you look at those lots, they are L-shaped lots. And for whatever reason, the one going to the east, is still B2, where it kind of L's off. And obviously this was originally L'd off for some reason as well. I'm not sure. Real quick, touching base on the garage and the driveway. We can make the driveway conforming by cutting 8 inches off. No big deal there. The garage is 8 inches too close to the lot line. So we have applied for the variance. If we aren't granted the variance, we'll just tear the garage down. Obviously, it would make it a lot nicer for the people renting the house if they had the garage, but it's something that we can comply with if we're not granted the variance. So that wouldn't ultimately end up preventing us, I guess, from complying with all the setbacks and zoning ordinances and stuff as far as that next step goes.
And just another, I think that the north arrow on your diagrams is pointing south. So
There actually, you know what, real quick, I don't know if now is the appropriate time. In the staff report, it does say 150, and the surveyor did an error. It's 105 on the one side of the lot, and then 150 on the other, and it's supposed to be 105, obviously, by 120.
Huh.
So I don't know if
That doesn't happen very often. Yep, I see.
So it should be the 105 east to west, and then 120, 121
Sure.
north to south. It's got the correct one on the south lot line, but.
Commissioner Wolf?
So right now, in B2, the driveway and the garage are conforming, is that correct? That has no setbacks, or? I can't remember, I think you have the table in there, but.
I have to find it. I think it's conforming under current zoning.
Yeah, that's why I said B2,
Yeah.
right. So rezoning it would be creating a nonconformity.
Well, it has to meet the standards in order to, I guess, yes, but
Right.
but it has to get the variance, so it has to be conforming.
Or even just to rezone it, not for.
Not to rezone it to qualify for the rental license.
Right, but what
Yeah.
I'm saying is the rezoning itself will make it non-conforming, whereas right now, physically, dimensionally.
Correct.
It is conforming.
Yep.
Any other questions for the applicant? More comments. All right, thank you. Since this is I'm sorry, Commissioner Denault.
I was still trying to form the question in my head. Can you talk a little bit more about what kind of future development you would intend to put in this? Looking at the future land use map, I see that it's kind of stuck right in the middle of C1, RM32, and R1. Which of those would you like to pursue eventually?
Sure. So like I mentioned at the beginning, we did some road townhomes on Okemos Road. I don't know if you're familiar with those or not, but there's 8 townhomes in a row. They're 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath townhomes. And we got 1-car garage, and they provided a nice niche for the market out there where people aren't in a position to buy. We get a lot of people from Jackson National or auto owners, those type of people that are coming into a new job and not in a position to buy yet or whatnot. So that was when we originally bought the front lot, is what kind of we envisioned going in there, some type of road townhomes of some nature. Whether that, like I say, we actually we had talked about possibly doing something similar to like I think it's 1717 is the address across the street. If we were able to acquire more land, maybe we could do something like that. We at one point had to sit down with a couple people about that, but didn't acquire or haven't been able to acquire any additional parcels to this point. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out on the future land use map excerpt that RM32 marking is an error, right?
Yeah, I think that was a typo from a previous map.
That's showing the current zoning for
Yeah,
that
right.
little square, not the future.
Right. Yeah, that whole, I don't know what color that is, manila color would all be R1. Including both properties owned by Hagen Real Estate.
So, if we do the townhomes, obviously you have apartments on the corner. You'd have some townhomes potentially there. It would be kind of a step down into the neighborhood, I guess.
Thanks. This is a public hearing, so I'll take this opportunity to open the public hearing and invite anybody in the from the public to come forward and make a comment on or questions about this application. It's just you. All right, thanks. And we don't have anybody in the queue?
Do not have anyone in the queue.
Thank you. Then we'll close the public hearing and return this to the commission. Any remaining questions or comments for staff or the applicant? All right, we will see this in 2 weeks then.
I guess I'm just seeking guidance on where the commission is on the rezoning and specifically the condition, so I can prepare something for the next meeting.
What would you do differently if we, based on, I'm not sure what you're.
Well, I mean, so
You have to prepare it as. the
prepare it
request is
with it,
written,
and
right?
it would be set for, if it fails, it fails. Is that how we've been doing those?
Oh, I see. Whether you should write a motion a certain way?
Yeah. I mean, it seems like what we've been doing is we write them in the affirmative, and then they fail. So I'll write it as, I guess I'll state this. I'll write it as with the condition included, and I guess we'll see how it goes.
Since that's what the application is,
Yeah.
are we kind of obligated to do it that way?
Yeah, we can do it that way.
I think if it's necessary to craft a alternate language, we could probably do that at the meeting.
Do that on the fly at the meeting. Okay.
I mean, I am sympathetic to the desire for the applicant to have as much certainty as they can, but with the understanding that typically the conditional rezoning is offered by the applicant as a way to make something that might not be palatable, typically more palatable to the city, right? Just sort of like, well, we'll be willing to not do this, which we would be allowed by right under this particular zoning. And this is sort of, I don't know, it seems like it flips that on its ear. So,
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Thanks. Absolutely. That will move us on to item 7.1. Oh, it's right here. Old business, this is consideration of the site plan to construct a pavilion and other site improvements at Valley Court Park. Whose address is 300 Valley Court. Mr. Menzer.
Thank you. So the commission had the public hearing on the proposal to construct the pavilion, do some repair work on the BWL building, and install some other site amenities at Valley Court Park at the last meeting. As I stated, and I think was very clear to everyone, it's a very conceptual plan that the city has right now. So as you see in the communications that were received from residents, so there's been a lot of communications received. I also kind of want to paint the picture. So we went to, we had the hearing with the Planning Commission. We went to DDA that same week. We had a community input session over at Valley Court Park last week and one evening. And then we'll be at the Historic District Commission tomorrow. The Parks Advisory Committee next week. So there's been a lot of avenues for public comment and more to come is what I'm trying to share. And if you read the letters and if you have heard any of the feedback on the project so far, it mirrors a lot of what the Planning Commission had shared in the past. So my takeaway from that was less green space or more green space, less parking. In a nutshell. So we have shared some feedback with the consultant team. They are busily putting together kind of the next iteration of this plan. I don't have it here for you today. I will tentatively have it for you at the December meeting. And what I'm hoping at that point is, when I get it, if I get it well ahead of the next meeting, I'll share it immediately so that you have some time leading up to the meeting rather than just kind of the weekend before. But that's, so I guess what I'm communicating is we're listening to a lot of different feedback and we're hearing a lot of the same things. We've transmitted that to this team. They are going to hopefully put a plan together that addresses some of those things. For example, removing that bank of parking on the far east side. Right now there's parking basically on the left side or the west side and the east side of the pavilion building. We're moving the parking on the east side, looking at eliminating one of the drives. So right now the plan has a connection out to Hillside Court and also Valley Court. So removing one of those and the pavement that goes along with that. Possibly incorporating the basketball hoops and the basketball court into some of the paving around the farmers market. And these are all just efforts to eliminate more paving, frankly. And then possibly reworking the drive to get some of that parking back on Valley Court that would be eliminated with the bump out for the crosswalk. So, and then we're going to have a plan also that shows the entire park. I think one of the shortcomings of the current concept plan is that it really kind of just shows like this little portion of the park, but we're missing green space and the tennis courts to the east and then a little bit to the west. So having all of that shown, I think is going to provide a lot more context for everyone. So that's it. So I wish I had more something substantial to share, but that's kind of the current update. And I'm hoping we'll have everything ready for you in December and possibly have a recommendation at that point. Commissioner Williams.
I just wanted to make sure we don't lose sight of the other thing that I heard repeatedly at the public hearing, in addition to preserving the green space and less parking of dedicated performance space, is something that came up over and over again. I didn't hear you mention that. I don't think that was deliberate, but I want to make sure that we don't lose sight of that.
Yeah, no, that I heard that as well. The challenge there, and I'm not saying it won't be a part of the plan, is where does it go? Is it a separate structure? Is it somehow incorporated into the market building itself? Mm-hmm. Could there be a phase 2 where there's a different spot on the site? Some people in the community have talked about like some kind of amphitheater or something that would be in maybe the northeast corner of the site, away from the neighbors that came south towards like where this pavilion building is. So I don't have an answer on how that fits in, but yeah, that was a lot of the comments had that.
I just want to make sure that whatever comes of this, it's a very exciting project, doesn't foreclose the opportunity to move in that direction in the future. That if it's not part of this, that we don't 5 years down the road say, oh, it's too bad we didn't do this a little differently because we couldn't do a performance space now. Yeah,
no, your point is well received. The other thing I would just want to mention is that, speaking of kind of future adaptability, I guess that's a word. Designing the pavilion structure so that it's modular in nature. So right now it's not as currently designed, and maybe as currently feasible in terms of cost. It doesn't have it's not able to be enclosed, and we haven't really seen detailed drawings of it yet. But the idea would be to build something that would be upgradable in the future, so that maybe that doesn't have an enclosure in phase 1, but in phase 2 or 3, that's something that could be added. So the building's designed that way so they could be added. So all of that's kind of, we gave that to a more creative people to come up with how it all is going to work, and I'll share that plan with you here soon.
Commissioner Boyd and Commissioner Wolf, please. Go ahead.
There was also a couple of comments at the last meeting concerning flooding, and I saw them in the emails as well. Only been here for a couple of years now.
I didn't hear you concerning.
Concerning flooding.
Oh, okay. I thought you said flames.
No, no flames. Flooding, sorry. I haven't witnessed it, but is there any data or history to that as far as flooding? Is that, I mean, it's obviously low land there, but.
Yeah, I don't have any data on it. I'm outside of the elevation. The green infrastructure that's been discussed so far are bioswales that would treat the runoff from any new paved surfaces. I don't expect, at least in this phase, that there would be a wholesale. I don't even know, and that's my ignorance, is I just don't know all the mechanical things that would have to happen to, because it can be like, even after a light rain, it can be a squishy walk through the park. So I don't know what the plan would be to address that. It's certainly, the way I understand, it's not included in phase 1. I think it's recognized, but not as part of this current scope.
Yeah, I have reservations about this. I'm glad we're looking at Valley Court Park. I'm glad we have gotten some money to work on it, but I'm just not sure this is the right thing to do there. The reduction in paving would be good. That's one of the things, paving over too much of the park is a step backwards, I think. So if we can make some changes in reducing the paving, that would improve it. As was mentioned, the pavilion is a pretty permanent thing. I mean, we're going to be putting, the whole cost of the project is $2 million, right? We have $1 million from the state, and we have to match that.
Yeah.
And if we put this in, that is going to be there for a long time. We have had talk about a possible indoor farmers market on the city center property at one point, or the DDA properties at one point. And it seems like there's still maybe some potential. If we did this, it could hurt the chances of getting an indoor one, because then that would just leave this pavilion there with no real purpose anymore. I'm not crazy about the fact that it pretty much splits the park in half also. I'd like to know if they considered putting this at either end of the park, so then there could be more flexibility to using the rest of the land. I don't know if there's any way to get an answer on that, if there were any
Definitely
alternative proposals for placing it.
Yeah, Wendy Longpree will be at the next meeting. She's at Parks, the Deputy Administrator of Parks. And they have a lot more background knowledge on the park and the kind of the long-term, how this discussion over the years has changed, because I just haven't been privy to a lot of that. So she can provide a lot of that context.
Yeah, and with it being in the middle, again, I think one of our speakers pointed out that people trying to go from one part of the park to the other are going to wind up just walking through the middle of it. They have, it shows walks and crosswalks, so there's proper places to go from the east to the west side of the park, but people don't always follow those. They're just going to walk across the driveways that are there, which is not really a great idea if we're having cars parking there. And so that's another reason putting it in the center is not real good. And then I think finally, the comments about the building that we have there, the power station, former power station. Yep. On that, I'm wondering if we really want to keep that and put more money into it. I think it's been, I don't know, how long has it been? 15 years since we moved it?
I think it was
that spot?
2007.
Yeah, just 15 years. And we haven't found a use for it yet. And now we're talking about putting part of this money into it to stabilize it for the most part, keep it weatherproof. And I'm wondering if it might be time to give up on that, which would give us more flexibility, possibly to put the pavilion down at the west end of the park. So I've just got a lot of questions and concerns about it. It just doesn't quite feel like the right plan. I don't know if that kind of feedback helps really, but
It does, thank you. Yeah, I'll deliver all this to the project team, and I'll,
like I say, I'd
we'll
like
have
to
the
see us do
minutes.
something.
Yeah.
But
Vice Chair Sullivan.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of those comments. So, I almost think it would be helpful, instead of having fully realized plans, if we could just see a few different configurations about what's possible. I don't know if we need something as detailed as this even, but just to see kind of what the farmers market would look like in the west end there. I think the problem with putting it on the west end potentially is it does hinder the visibility for maybe some people that are in town that aren't from East Lansing. It's kind of tucked away, more difficult to see there. But, I don't know if we need to maintain the BWL building. I think that site in particular would be really good for a performance area for the community. It's kind of shaped, probably would be pretty good acoustically tucked in between the buildings there. I like the comment of getting rid of the basketball court paving and kind of incorporating that into the parking that's already there. You could even do like a half court basketball, and I was trying to envision where the hoops would go on both ends, and it was pretty tough. But I think you could easily put a hoop at the south end of the west parking lot there. I like the idea of making the actual pavilion building multi-function, so that there's a lot of different things we could use it for, especially in the winter. Things I can't even envision, but just having the flexibility there, I think, would be important. So just some general thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you.
Commissioner Denal.
I did bring up flooding as a concern at the last meeting, and I wondered if there was any sort of environmental impact statement or any sort of environmental review that had been done as part of the project, and if there was, could we see that?
Sure, I think that they did a phase 1 on the project. I don't know if that's not going to probably speak to your points, but I'll see what we've got and I'll add it to the next packet.
And I do just want to point out and echo my fellow commissioners to say that I think that there are other ways to have the same action, right? To have the space for the farmers market, but also to have an enclosed space, right? When I lived in Chicago, and I know that East Lansing is not Chicago, but I did run a farmers market there. So I do have thoughts and feelings about farmers markets. Sometimes we would have our market in a parking garage, right? Again, it's a covered space. There are many parking garages downtown that are not always full, that we could utilize for that purpose. The largest farmers market in Chicago is also in a park, but it sits on unpaved land, right? It is, Green City Market is in the middle of Lincoln Park. And so I don't necessarily know that the paving and the improvements to the farmers market have to go hand in hand, right? I don't necessarily think that it's one or the other. Why can't we have and?
Yeah.
So.
Any other comments? I'll just add that if there is an additional plan that seeing it long before the day of the meeting,
Yeah.
we've talked about this before, and largely because I think that people are going to want to make comments on it, even if it's not part of the public hearing. They'll certainly have the opportunity to make written comments on it, and if we see it the day of the meeting.
Yeah, as soon as we get it,
I
I'll
know.
send it out.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm extremely curious to hear what the vendors have to say. There's one meeting scheduled with the market vendors, correct?
We had the meeting with the market vendors. It was this last Monday afternoon.
Oh, okay.
And several of them were there, and mixed. If I had to summarize, I guess mixed reaction. They were excited about a permanent spot to do the sales, and I understand that perspective. I mean, they're people that are schlepping their stuff to the market and have to set up and everything. But it's the same kind of comments about green space and parking and.
comments or questions? Please, Vice Chair.
Just curious, in regard to parking, did they think that there was not enough or that there was too much, or what was their perspective? on
What
that?
I have heard, and I'm characterizing it just in what I'm hearing, is that there is enough right now and we don't need more.
Good to know.
All right, then. That'll move us on to item 7.2, consideration of special use permit to establish an adult use marijuana retail facility at 2040 Merritt Road.
Oh, that's me. So there's a memo, and so this was the Planning Commission had their public hearing on this meeting on this request at the last meeting. To summarize, there is a special use permit has already been granted to the site to sell medical marijuana products. The applicant is now seeking a special use permit to add the adult use. So if it is ultimately approved by council, they would be able to sell both. There's a motion in your meeting packet, and also there are 19 conditions we've added to this. These are conditions that were on all of the other marijuana special use permits, and they're talk about kind of the operation of the facility, but they're all intended to ensure compliance with the city's regulations related to marijuana sales. And yeah, so if you'll consider a motion, there is one in your packet.
Thank you. Any questions for Commissioner Wolf? Or
I was ready to make a motion. I'll move that we recommend approval of the special use permit request to establish an adult use marijuana retail facility at 2040 Merritt Road, subject to 19 conditions. I'm going to summarize a little bit here. Approval is based on the findings that the property is located in a overlay district that allows this use. The proposal meets the standards of review for that use. The use of the property is compatible with surrounding uses, and the application already received special use permit approval for a medical marijuana facility at the same location. And let's see, I already say subject to the 19 conditions.
there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
It's been moved by Commissioner Wolf and seconded by Commissioner Williams to recommend approval of this proposal to City Council. Is there any discussion on that motion? Commissioner Wolf?
The ordinances for the, what do we call it, adult use marijuana were pretty much set up to be automatic. It's a follow-on to those who already have a medical marijuana license. So there's not a whole lot of controversy. The conditions are standard and this meets the conditions. So I'll be voting to approve it.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, then let's have a vote. We'll call for a vote. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. I presume that you're, thank you. Is new business still, new business, item 8.1, section 61, review for Valley Court Park. Its address is 300 Valley Court. Mr. Menzer.
Yep, so this is an item that may be a little bit different. I'm not sure, I just don't have the history with this group, how often you've done what is called section 61 reviews under the Michigan Planning and Enabling Act. I'm familiar with them from working in another municipality, and they're used in a variety of ways. Most often, I saw them as part of land acquisition on behalf of the municipality. So I attached a couple articles from MSU Extension, and they probably tell you the whole story better than I can do, than I'll do sitting here. But generally, this is for consideration anytime a municipality is considering capital improvements for new roads, new parks, new large infrastructure, like a big extension of a big sewer main or sewer or water main. And those articles provide a little history on kind of why this is considered. You'll have to notice that the MSU Extension article is called the Forgotten Law, and I'm not sure. I've only worked a couple places. I'm not sure how often this happens. I also included a link to the capital improvements program just to give you some context of kind of how this project's been considered in the context of that over the years. That's not part of this review, it's just more background information. So obviously, we've talked at length now about the concept plan for Valley Court Park. The context to this review, I would consider it or the frame of mind, I think, to consider this in is should the city consider whether or not the city should consider improvements in this area in the context of the master plan. It's not about should the city spend money necessarily on these things. It's more kind of like the concept of should the city consider a facility in this area. So there's a couple of different things so there's a staff memo in your meeting packet. And what I generally am trying to establish here is what the review is. So it's the section 61, the state act does not provide much guidance on how this is supposed to happen. I think you saw it's like a paragraph on what they include. The way I have always understand it, it's location, character, and extent. That's about what's offered in the state law. What I do and what I provide in the staff memo is just very brief, and there's not a lot to say about this. But the location is really where this is at. So the site's placement in the city, in the surrounding of that site. The character is the project's distinguishing features, such as amenities in the park and green space. And the extent of the project refers to really the size, so the dimensions of the site and the frontages on adjacent streets. That's how I see the ordinance or this review applying to this particular site. You may feel differently, and I'd like to hear that. Then also the review and what I gleaned from the articles from MSU Extension were really that this review needs to remain in the context of the master plan. So in the staff memo, I just note a couple places where it's mentioned. And I think there was another mention. It was like with a photograph. I didn't include that, but there's under the goals and objectives. Under goal 1, which is to capitalize on and strengthen existing citizen assets. It talks about kind of a vision. It's more of a graphic. It talks about a space to house a year-round farmers market, providing year-round local and fresh food access. It doesn't designate a specific location where that would go, but it envisions that as part of a goal in the master plan. The other place it's mentioned is the future land use map. So the future land use map for this area is designated as parks, schools, open space. That's from the 2018 master plan, the future land use map. So this area in 2018 was envisioned as having the park as the centerpiece, having multifamily residential around it, and then the neighborhood to the north and commercial to the south, which is essentially how it exists today. So I included a motion in the meeting packet. I know there's been a lot of conversation about this project, but the way I was seeing it is more of conceptually, do you think a park, improvements to the park in this area are appropriate? And you may consider it differently. But that's how I was seeing this, kind of given not a lot of guidance on how these go. But so I did include a motion to recommend approval or to approve it. There is a provision, I didn't include it in here. If the planning commission were to deny it, city council can override with a certain vote your denial of it. I don't think your denial would stop the project necessarily, and I'm not saying that the city would proceed with doing something that's not considered to be a good endeavor, but that would. Sorry, I'm rambling here, but I was trying to find something specific. One second. Yeah, I think a denial of this project is not a denial, or denial of the section 61 isn't an ultimate denial of the project because the council can override this particular part.
So would you rather wait for a motion until we actually see what's ultimately proposed? I mean, in as much as I know that with the location, character, and extent are somewhat vague. Yeah. And if that's what you're most comfortable with, that makes sense to me. There's not all the projects going along at the same time, so you wouldn't be stopping forward progression. No, I appreciate that. Just as a reminder to us that this is something that's supposed to be done and it isn't always done. Is that? That was the gist of why I brought it up in the first place. Right. Are there any questions or comments? Commissioner Wolf?
Yes, I think that makes sense. We would be voting on something that we're not really sure what it is at this point.
Yep.
I did want to point out, and I think this might be applicable in one of the MSU articles. It says, you may frequently find that the master plan does not reference a particular project, or the master plan is just not specific enough. In such cases, it is appropriate for the planning commission to respond to the request for review by saying something to the effect that, quote, "we have no comment." And part of me says that might apply in this case because, you found a couple of references, but that one picture of an example, look, I forget what the heading says.
The picture
Take
this.
a look, or picture this.
Yeah.
It's just an example. It doesn't plan anything. It doesn't say this is what we should do. It's kind of I don't know what, a possibility, yeah.
Yeah, I scoured the document for a specific reference to like a farmer's market should be here, and we don't get that level of detail.
Right. And I assume you were also looking for references to Valley Court Park?
Yeah. Yep.
And so the map showing Valley Court Park as a C1 or, no, not C, but whatever it's called, park. Zoning, of course, makes sense, but that doesn't really help with this decision either. So we might want to think about that kind of a recommendation.
I can add that into the options for when this does get considered in December. And I remember that I'm looking at that section as well, and that is definitely an option, and I didn't include it in.
Yeah, it would kind of be saying that we think the master plan is simply neutral in regards to this plan.
Yeah, thank you.
Comments or questions? Right. So we'll presumably see this in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Or where we may or may not act on it. Commissioner concerns, item number 9. None? All right, then a motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
It's been moved by Commissioner Wolf and seconded by Commissioner Hendricks. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed? That motion carries. We are adjourned at 8:16.